Hey, pushers. All right, so this lesson is going to help us keep on track and also kind of cover some things that you probably covered last year or you're somewhat vaguely familiar with from last year in world history when you learned about imperialism. So today is going to be a lesson, the first lesson for key period 7A. Because the key period's so big, I'm going to split it up into two halves. So this is going to be on American imperialism. And we're going to start off with the political cartoon that we see in the picture here. It's titled 10,000 Miles from Tip to Tip. And if you see the picture down at the very bottom here, we have a map of the United States from 1798. And then in the larger image up at the top, we are now 1898. So it's only 100 years afterwards. In 1798, the United States ends at the Mississippi River. But in 1898, just 1 century later, the United States maintained some control over territories that reach 10,000 miles around the globe. That's nearly halfway around the entire Earth. And it just shows how quickly the United States was able to grow and to gain this territory and gain this amount of power much faster than any other nation in the history of the world. And so it really shows a level of American exceptionalism. So we're going to begin by looking at exactly what is going to push America out beyond its continental borders. And the first of these events is actually going to happen back in key period 5. It's going to happen just following the American Civil War. In 1867, the United States is going to purchase the territory of Alaska from the Russians. Our Secretary of State, Mr. Seward, is going to purchase this at the cost of a lot of criticism. Nobody can see any reason why to purchase this. It's frigid, it's desolate, there's like no people. Why would anybody buy this? And so they lambasted him, calling it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. They called it Frigidonia, or my personal favorite, Wall Russia. So definitely making fun of him for it. Didn't know that 25 years later they would just happen to find a massive gold storage there, and so there would be a massive gold rush to Alaska. But although it does turn out very well for us, really the significance of this to our ideas on imperialism, Alaska is not connected to the United States geographically. It's the first foray for the United States outside of its continental borders. And that's a really significant thing because it's showing that the United States has the power, has the money, has the ability to not only purchase this, but to control it from outside of a physical contact. And so it's showing America has grown and is increasing in its ability as well as in its international power. Another major thing is going to be the social gospel movement. We have applied this idea of improving urban slums and improving the lives of the needy through the use of Christian values. But now we're going to take that same idea and we're going to expand outside of America's borders, looking at countries around the world that suffer from issues of war and crime and vice and sin. And they are going to want to bring those Christian values there as well to kind of civilize these heathens. And as you can kind of see, there's a little bit of a racial motive behind it, that we believe that white culture and white society is superior to all and should be the predominant culture and society around the world. We'll go more into detail about this in just a minute, but know that this is going to be a major motivation behind America reaching beyond its continental borders. We also need new markets. We've gotten to a point with our Industrial Revolution in the second half of the 1800s where Americans are going to buy and have bought everything that they're going to buy. Our European commercial allies have bought everything that they're going to buy from us. So we're at a point where we've kind of plateaued economically and we need new people to buy our stuff. So we reach out for those reasons. But one of the bigger reasons for that is also those other countries have items that we very much desire. They have raw materials that we very much desire. They have cheap labor that we very much desire. And so this is going to motivate the United States, especially American businessmen, to now turn their eyes outward beyond America's coastline to go find these raw materials and these cheap labor sources. We also have severe competition with Europe, not just economically to sell one more thing and to beat them in business, but it's also international power. Europe started imperializing when we were in the midst of the Civil War, so we obviously were a little busy and couldn't participate. So we're kind of behind the eight ball on this, and Europe is just increasing its power, and the United States really wants to be able to catch up and prove to the world that we are an international power. And so by taking over other countries to having international influence, it is going to increase America's international power as well. And finally, just the idea of the closing of the West. When Frederick Jackson Turner in 1893 wrote his thesis about the importance of the frontier, he said, based on the census, the frontier had been settled. There was no longer any quote unquote uncharted territory. And so because there's no uncharted territory, there's no frontier left for people to go and explore and to innovate and force, a level of self-sufficiency that it always had done for Americans. If that is no longer there, if there is no frontier left in our continental United States, then we need to turn our eyes outward and find another frontier for us to conquer and to innovate and for us to kind of rebuild a new American culture and a new American character. So we're going to be looking at the racial side of this imperialist movement. And so the first of these is social Darwinism. We talked about this in our last key period, but we had applied it to the idea of business, where if your business failed, hey, that's on you. You just weren't fit enough or didn't have the ability to adapt to business in order to survive. Well, now we're going to take that same idea, but we're going to be applying it to human beings. We're going to be applying it to an idea of racial hierarchy, of believing that actually certain humans are racially more evolved than others, and their society and their culture is more evolved than others. And this is going to be further kind of motivated by something called Anglo-Saxonism. Anglo-Saxon just means English or English speaking or of English-based culture, which America is an English-speaking and English-based culture. So even though many times it does apply to England itself, because Anglo-Saxon is English, because we're an English-based society, it applies to us too. And so the idea of Anglo-Saxonism is the belief that white culture is superior. So basically, this is white supremacy. And by the way, this next thing I'm going to show you, if you are offended, good, you should be, because it is highly offensive. They actually, kind of combining these two ideas of social Darwinism and Anglo-Saxonism, essentially created a racial hierarchy. Now, up at the very top, we have our WASPs, our white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And so this is basically anyone in the United States, essentially. Virtually, all American presidents have been WASPs, except for, our most recent president. And I can kind of think of John F. Kennedy's our only Catholic. But aside from that, they're all WASPs. Pretty much everyone who's been, one of the major business leaders that we've talked about, or any of the major politicians or cultural leaders, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants have had this power in the United States. And this is kind of who we believed was the penultimate of civilization, those at the very, very top. Underneath would be any other Europeans, either Europeans that came from countries that were not white, so that could include Italians or Greeks. It could apply to those that came from countries that were not English speaking. So for example, that could include places like Russia or Poland. And it could also include countries that had high numbers of Catholics, including Ireland. So the fact that they were surrounded by and came in contact with the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, that allowed them to be still very high up at the top, just not quite as civilized, not quite as evolved. Underneath that, we have Latinos. Why? Because even those that are here in the Americas had access, excuse me, had access to European culture. Why? Because Latin America had been conquered by the Spanish, and the Spanish are other Europeans. So they had that kind of contact. So it allowed them to be higher up on the scale. Underneath that, we have Asians. Now, Asians have advanced technology, they had advanced medicine, they had advanced government. So those were things that kind of kept them higher up on the scale. But the fact that they had obviously a non-English speaking country, they're definitely not white, and they were a country that that had some very seemingly bizarre cultural things that Americans just couldn't really understand or weren't willing to understand. That's part of the reason why they're kind of further down the line. Governmentally and I guess technologically, they were better than probably even the Latinos were. However, the fact that they were the wrong color and they had very little contact with Europeans kind of forced them down the line. Underneath that, Native Americans. Not only are they the wrong color, the wrong language, the wrong religion, but they live in tribes. They are not of a traditional or quote unquote civilized governmental system, and so they're going to be further down the line. But what's the one thing that's in their benefit? Native Americans are American and therefore have had access and contact to WASPs. So they have at least been shown American ways. And so we've seen this example with like the Carlisle Indian School, where they were trying to make the Indians less Indian, that they were trying to quote unquote kill the Indian but save the child. Finally, at the very bottom here, we have Africans. Now, essentially this was meaning Africans in Africa, but in all honesty, it really meant anyone who was black, including those here in the United States. And the reason they were at the bottom is because in Africa, they still were the wrong color, the wrong language, the wrong religion. They also were in tribes. They didn't have very much access to Europeans or to Americans. And so as a result, they were at the very bottom. But we're going to get even more racial, and we're going to get even more offensive with this one. It goes back to the idea of social Darwinism, and specifically Darwin's idea of the evolution of the species. And as we know, Darwin's theory is that humans come from monkeys. Well, what color is a monkey? Black. Which ones are black? Right down here. What is the least black color? White. And that's how they were able to, quote unquote, scientifically prove that white people were more evolved than blacks. And again, if you are offensive, good, you are offended, good, you should be, because this is incredibly offensive. But this was the predominant philosophy at the time and was seen as kind of the most advanced scientific theory of the time as well. So here we see a political cartoon that really exemplifies these ideas. And the title of this is The White Man's Burden. Now, The White Man's Burden was actually a poem that was written by Rudyard Kipling. And he wrote this poem as part of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And it was big in celebration of Britain's accomplishments under Queen Victoria's reign. So here's just the very first stanza that we see here. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Now, a lot of you guys actually know Rudyard Kipling, you just probably don't realize it. He is the man who wrote The Jungle Book. And if you think about that story, it's about a little Indian boy who then has to find his way to civilization. And the thing is, why would an English guy be writing about an Indian boy? Please remember, Britain owned India at this time, and Rudyard Kipling had actually grown up in India. His father had served in the military there. And so from his perspective, white people being in India was bringing superior culture to India. Now, looking at the political cartoon here, we can see that same philosophy. Here we have Uncle Sam, so right here. And then here we have the English, I guess, Uncle Sam. His name is John Bull. And so they are marching up this hill, and they are crossing things like vice and ignorance, oppression, slavery, cannibalism, and they are trying to carry these very heavy loads up to civilization. Now, who are these people? Well, if you can see, these are all the various countries that have been taken over by America and by Great Britain. And so the idea is that it is the white man's burden to carry these groups to civilization because they cannot do it themselves. And the idea of the white man's burden goes beyond just this poem and goes beyond just England. In fact, it is very predominant here in the United States. It is a major justification for imperialism. It is our job, our duty, our burden, our obligation to civilize these individuals. And the idea of the white man's burden and this obligation to the lesser nations is shown in a million different places, and it was a very effective advertisement. For example, the first step towards lightening the white man's burden is Pear's soap. And then the one on the left here, which is probably one of the most offensive things you'll see all day, here we have, I have found Pear's soap matchless for the hands and the complexion. What happens? We have a little white boy, and he gives Pear's soap to this little black boy, and holy cow, what happens? He turns the little black boy white. Now, the idea behind this is teaching these quote-unquote heathen peoples about cleanliness and sanitation, but really it's also very racially motivated, as we can see clearly from this advertisement. But not everybody's going to be in favor of imperialism, so we got to look at the pros and the cons. So as far as the pros, definitely increased economic opportunities. We are going to be able to buy and sell much more of our goods, and we're also going to be able to get raw materials that are much cheaper. We're going to have an improved global status. We are going to be more powerful because we are in control of more countries. We have the new materials and the new goods that we did not have before. This reduces prices for the creation of various goods, which then is going to help increase the standard of living for Americans. And finally, we see it as an expansion of democracy as well as Christianity. We see it as the expansion of our deepest ideals and the deepest parts of the American identity of democracy should be for everybody. And so by taking this idea and bringing it to, countries around the world, we are kind of fulfilling our destiny as the flag bearers of democracy. Now the flip side, it's expensive, incredibly expensive, because to take over a country requires a huge military effort. And then once you've taken it over, you have to continue to have the military there to protect it from outsiders, as well as protect it from those in the country who might rebel and try and take back their land. And economically, it's incredibly expensive because you have to pay somebody to actually, to run that country and to create infrastructure and those types of things. So it's very expensive for us to do. Another one. There could be a negative international opinion of the United States. Although, yes, we would be more powerful, other countries might see us almost like a bully, like we are forcing our way in and taking over things that we have no place to do so. And so that could actually hurt our international image. And finally, the destruction of traditional cultures. Now, I'm going to be honest, most people didn't really care much about this last one. Today, we very much are very concerned about this because some of those traditional cultures that were threatened by American imperialism have very strong roots in America today. And we'll actually be looking at some of these in just a few minutes. So who's in favor and who's against? So if we need like a person to attach to each idea. If we're looking at the pro side, we're looking at Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan and his book that he wrote, The Influence of Sea Power on History. Excuse me. He went ahead and researched how countries have gained and maintained power throughout history. And he came to the conclusion that it all came down to how powerful your navy was. If you go back to even like ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the areas that had the most power, the ones that were able to conquer others, were the ones that had the strongest navy. He then goes forward. Okay, you don't believe me? Let's look at what happened with Spain. Spain was the wealthiest, most powerful nation on the planet. They built this invincible armada, and that made them like invincible on the seas. They were the naval power, and thus they were the world power. But what happened? They were defeated by the British, and suddenly the Spanish are no longer a world power, and suddenly the British now rise up. Their navy is now the supreme one. And so if America wants to be supreme, we have to have a strong, powerful navy. On the flip side, Mark Twain was a very vocal anti-imperialist. And we'll talk more about this particular story that he wrote, which is called The War Prayer. We'll be talking about that actually next class. But the War Prayer is really significant because it is just this scathing indictment of imperialism and reminding people of the death and destruction and cost that comes along with the glory and power of gaining a new territory. So we're going to be looking at America's kind of first early little steps into imperialism, and that's going to be in the Pacific. And we are going to be looking at two kind of big areas. We're going to be looking at China, and we will also look at Hawaii. So we're going to start off actually not quite in China. We're actually going to be going just next door, and we're going to be looking at Japan. Now, the Treaty of Kanagawa is going to be made in 1858. So this is back in key period 5. And the reason we didn't study it then is because it really better matches in this particular area. So the Treaty of Kanagawa was going to be put together by Commodore Matthew Perry, and it's this Matthew Perry, not that Matthew Perry. And Commodore Matthew Perry is going to be sent by Franklin Pierce to go to Japan and get them to make trades with us. Japan was extremely closed off at this time, did not really trade with anybody. And the United States really wanted some of the items that were being produced in Japan, also wanted to increase, who we could sell to. And so he goes down there with these massive, massive ships, like several times bigger than anything that the Japanese had, sails into Japan and says, hey, you want to trade? And they are so amazed and also so intimidated by this that they kind of hesitantly agree of like, well, I guess so. I guess we kind of have to. And so we suddenly have open trade in Japan. We are going to then go ahead and annex or kind of absorb into the United States. That's what annex means. We are going to annex several islands throughout the Pacific for either resources or, what is more frequent at this point, for strategic military locations where we can have kind of like refueling stations for our ships and for our trade. So for example, we take over Samoa. We're also going to take over Midway Island, which is going to get its name because it is midway between the United States West Coast and the coast of Asia. And we're also going to take over like a whole bunch of teeny tiny Pacific islands that you've probably never heard of that America actually still controls today. The United States actually has a lot of territories that it controls that most Americans are not even aware of. Another thing that we're going to do that's going to be kind of in our own hemisphere is going to be with Latin America, and that's going to be called the quote unquote big sister policy. The big sister policy is the idea that the United States is going to serve as a big sister to Latin America, that we are going to try and guide them, teach them, protect them so that they can grow and thrive and prosper. And this is going to be kind of furthered through the Pan American Conference in 1889. And the idea was to improve political and economic relations between America and South America. And as you might guess, though, Latin America was none too pleased with this. They felt that it was the United States horning in on its business, the United States trying to force its culture on Latin America, telling Latin America what they can and cannot do. And as you might guess, they were a little bit offended by that. But we used the Monroe Doctrine as our justification. Going back to the Monroe Doctrine, it says that the Americas are closed to colonization. Well, we said if you don't want to get colonized, if you don't want to get invaded and taken over, you have to have an advanced civilization. You have to have an advanced society. And most of you guys, despite the fact that maybe some of you have gained your independence, you still don't have a strong economy. You still don't have a strong government. You still don't know what the heck you're doing. So America needs to show you the way. So like I said, as you might guess, the Latin American countries are none too pleased with this because they see it as an encroachment of their own personal liberties. So now we get to China. So China, the way that I kind of want to introduce it is just with this picture. I actually got to go to China a few years back with some students. This is the picture of the Great Wall that I took when we went there. And just a little side note, if you ever do get a chance to go to China, just a little word of advice, don't make the mistake I did and wear flip-flops. It is not meant for flip-flops, and you will fall, and it will be embarrassing. So just a little personal note for you. So, but the reason I picked this in particular is because of the Great Wall. Why was the Great Wall created in the first place? It was created so that they could protect their country from outsiders. China has always wanted to protect itself from outsiders, to be independent, and also to be isolationist. And for the United States, this is going to be a problem because we do want to trade with China. And other countries want to trade with China. And a lot of the issues with China are actually going to be caused by Europe, but America is definitely going to be sticking its nose in it. So let's go ahead and start looking at what happens. It all starts off with opium. And as you recall, opium is utilized in a lot of medicines in the United States at that time, specifically the most popular medicine of the time, which was laudanum. And opium comes from poppies that are grown all over China. And it's interesting because although we used it as this medicine, which granted most people got addicted to it because, it's heroin. But we would villainize the Chinese that were living in America for utilizing it as a recreational drug. And yet at the same time, there were Americans who used it as a recreational drug as well. Any of you guys who are fans of like the Sherlock Holmes stories, he would frequent the opium dens. And so there's a lot of this going on in the Gilded Age period. But eventually, the Emperor of China realizes that his people are becoming severely addicted to this, and it is causing major problems in his country also because of the demand for trade of it with Europeans. And so he decides, you know what, forget it, we're just going to stop producing it, and announces that he is cutting off all production of opium from China. Great Britain is upset about this. They really want the opium, and so they actually go to war with China over this. They are going to defeat China, and China is going to be forced to continue producing opium. But what happens as a result is the rise of the Boxers. Now, the Boxer Rebellion, first of all, why they're called Boxers. The official name is the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. But if you are an American or a European and you don't really like learning other people's languages because, that's hard, when you see, Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, you're thinking of someone who's going to fight, so you think of a boxer. And so that's where they got the name. But this particular group was anti-foreign and anti-Christian. They did not like these foreigners coming in and trying to run their economy, run their government, and kind of change their culture. And they didn't like the Christian missionaries who were coming in and trying to force their religion upon the people of China. And so what's going to happen is that they are going to rebel. And the Boxers truly were this kind of like grassroots movement of peasants and farmers who were trying to protect their land and trying to protect their culture. They practiced martial arts, and an unfortunate side is that they actually believed that by practicing these martial arts, they would be impervious to the bullets of the Westerners. And obviously that was not true. And so they were very handily put down by the Europeans that were going to fight them. So how's America get involved in this? Well, the problem is that Europe has gone in and has picked off pieces of China over the last few decades. So here on the far right-hand side, the wolf is representing Italy. They don't really have it written very clearly there. The double-headed eagle is Austria. Then the lion is Great Britain. Just a fun fact, they also have a second official national animal, and that would be the unicorn. Up here we have another eagle, and that is Germany. We have Russian bears, as well as Japan's wild cat. And then this one right here, the little rooster, that would be France. And then who's hanging out here in the corner? Well, that's the United States. Now looking at what's going on in the picture here, they're all fighting over China. And these are going to represent the various quote-unquote spheres of influence that European nations had gotten in China. Now, none of them had tried to necessarily take over China. They saw that was impossible because of the Boxer Rebellion. But they still wanted to be able to kind of control a specific region, especially one that had resources that they particularly wanted. Well, the United States got into this game a little late. Not a lot of stuff was left to be taken over. And so the United States is looking for a way to be able to trade with China without having to fight all these other countries for it. And so America's got to come up with a brilliant plan. It's called the open door policy. Now, the idea, as I said, is to increase influence in China. This is going to try and combat the various foreign spheres of influence from Russia and Germany and Britain and Italy, etc. The open door policy is going to be signed in 1900. This is going to happen under President William McKinley, and it is going to be brokered by Secretary of State John Hay. Now, John Hay knew that if he went over and tried to get an American sphere of influence, he wouldn't really be able to come up with anything. And he knew that the various European nations wouldn't just give in willingly. So he goes to the various European nations and he asks each of them, hey, Great Britain, everybody's having a really difficult time trading in China because while everything's cool for you in your sphere of influence, you can't really trade in the area that like Italy controls. So if America could broker a deal where everybody would have open trade in China, would you be willing to do that? And Great Britain says, well, that sounds like a great idea, but we're not going to give up our stuff until everybody else has, because we don't want to be the guy who like does it first and then no one else does, and then now we lose a bunch of money and power. And America's like, oh no, I totally get that. Hey, Germany, hey, what do you think about open trade in China? Well, sounds like a cool idea, but we're not going to be the first to do it because we don't want to be the schmuck who, loses all of his territory. No, totally understand, totally understand. And we do this with country after country after country after country. And what happens eventually? All of them essentially say the same thing. Yeah, we love the idea, but we're not going to be the first to do it. So what do? We say, well, hey, you kind of consented in principle, therefore it's a thing now. John Hay basically writes up this open door policy and gives it to all of the other European nations and says, haha, see here, now everybody gets to be here, and you all agreed to it. And they were all kind of a little bit surprised, but at the same time, we used diplomacy in order to open up greater economic trade. And so that was kind of seen as not only a diplomatic win, a win for the country as far as our power, but also it was a great economic win because now we're going to be able to not only have this trade, but also not have the competition with the other nations. And our final topic for tonight is going to be Hawaii. Now, a quick thing to just note about Hawaii and something that will kind of help you understand the Hawaiian people. The name Hawaii actually tells you their Native people's origin story. We remember our origin stories from like our very first day of class, where we were talking about how Native American tribes each believed that they came from a different place. And we're open to the idea that while my people might have, come off of a rainbow, your people might have been born off of the back of a turtle or whatever. Well, the Hawaiian people, you can tell their origin story from their name. Ha and Wai. The word ha means breath of life. It breathes life, it gives life. And Wai means water. So, where do the Hawaiian people come from? They were born from the water, which makes sense because, yeah, they're a bunch of volcanoes. So let's look at what happens in America and Hawaii. We got to actually go backwards a little bit so you can understand a little bit of history of Hawaii, so you can understand kind of how America's dominance is going to occur. So old Hawaii, it was actually several different kingdoms. Each island had their own king. Some of them had multiple kings, just based off of the leaders of each various tribe. And as more time is going to go on and as more white people show up in this beautiful tropical paradise, one of the Hawaiians believes that the only way for them to protect themselves from this white encroachment and to protect themselves from becoming subject to the white people there, they needed to band together. And this was going to be done by King Kamehameha I. Kamehameha is going to go over to the various islands, and he is going to fight and he is going to conquer all of the other islands. And he is going to bring them together under one kingdom that he is going to be the head of. There is a huge Kamehameha festival every year in Hawaii. It is amazing. It is wonderful. If you ever get a chance to go, totally recommend it. Great time, amazing food, and beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Just the gorgeous flower lays everywhere. It's just remarkable. So Kamehameha now unifies Hawaii together as this one kingdom. And he is doing this to try and protect the country against the encroachment by these white settlers. And there are a lot of them. And the reason they're all going to Hawaii, it's not because of like the white people go there today where they're just like, they want to live a like quieter, more laid back atmosphere and that kind of thing. They were going there for agriculture. And they were going to go to try and create these plantations similar to what we had seen back in the pre-Civil War days. So all of these white people are going to create these various plantations. There are sugar plantations, macadamia nut plantations, and the most famous of all of them is going to be the pineapple plantation that is going to be purchased by Sanford Dole. And Sanford Dole is going to become an incredibly powerful business leader there, and also will kind of take a role as political leader for the white Americans that are living there, despite the fact that he didn't have any actual real political power since the country was a monarchy. And that brings us to the last monarch, which is Queen Lili'uokalani. And I know that name looks really difficult, but it's a lot easier than you think. It is pronounced Lili'uokalani. So Queen Lili'uokalani is going to be the last monarch of Hawaii. She is going to take the throne, and she is going to see this rise of all of these, white businessmen who are taking more and more and more power and economic control in the country. Some of them are buying entire islands so that they can make a plantation there, and basically ruling that particular island and the people that work there, ruling it as a king, essentially, and their people as peasants, serfs, or slaves. And she's extremely concerned about this, but she's also understanding that these white people have brought immense amounts of businesses and money to the country of Hawaii. And so she doesn't necessarily want to upset them because she wants them to keep their businesses in her country. However, the white people, they don't like to have someone else as their leader. First of all, they're Americans and they're living in a foreign country. That means that they don't have the same rights or privileges. And one of the biggest things for these farmers and plantation owners is that they want to have cheaper prices to sell their goods in America. If you were going to buy a pineapple from Hawaii in the United States at this time, it would cost you roughly $20. Today's equivalent of $20. And it was just because you had to pay this incredibly high tariff. Why? Because America had high tariffs because we wanted to make sure that Americans were buying American manufactured goods. But this was really bad for these American plantation owners that were living in the country of Hawaii. So they devised a plan to take over Hawaii so that they can then have these cheaper fares. And they're going to do this through a group called the Committee of Safety, which is going to be headed by Sanford Dole. They call themselves the Committee of Safety because they are, I guess, trying to protect the safety, quote unquote, of the white Americans living in the territory. However, in order to take control of the country, they send a message to the United States, essentially saying that they are feeling like they are threatened and that help needs to be sent immediately. During this period of time, the Committees of Safety has created their own militia and is drilling their own militia, has created kind of a pseudo-government of their own, and, basically in direct threat to Lili'uokalani's administration. And lo and behold, their message to the United States is received, and the U.S. Marines end up in Oahu. They park in a bay called Pearl Harbor and never left. And so the Committee of Safety is able to then threaten Queen Lili'uokalani. They place her under house arrest, and during this period of time, she is begging the United States, sending desperate pleas to Congress saying, please, you're a country that believes in peace. You're a country that believes in democracy, about the rule of law. You're a Christian nation, and you are not adhering to any of these things when you're allowing these people and your military to threaten my country. Please, I don't want to have to fight anybody. She really felt that she could solve the problem with words, and she felt that she could kind of apply to America's better nature, but the greed was just too strong. And so eventually she was forced to surrender and abdicate the throne. Sanford Dole would then take control, declaring himself governor of Hawaii, and would immediately apply for annexation by the United States. Now, this was accepted, or rather brought in to President Grover Cleveland, and Grover Cleveland did not like the way that this whole Hawaii thing went down. He did feel that it was an abuse of power. He felt that they had overstepped their bounds, and so he refused to annex Hawaii. But that didn't really matter because he was on his way out anyway, and William McKinley would come in, and McKinley would then annex Hawaii in 1898. And so that's how America got Hawaii, through a completely illegal act. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to go back to America's idea of Anglo-Saxonism and this white superiority, that it was our job to bring white culture and remove traditional cultures because they were backwards and uncivilized. Well, here are two great examples of why our failure in that can actually be a very good thing. The pitfalls of Anglo-Saxonism. We got to the Pacific Islands, and this is not just to Hawaii, but we got to the Pacific Islands and we were quite horrified by many of the things that we saw, because their societies were so much more free than ours were. Very similar to the Native Americans. Women had power, which you didn't have in the United States, that they were much more free sexually, that they had greater kind of gender equality, like all kinds of things that were just really uncomfortable to a lot of Americans. And a great example of this is us outlawing the use of hula. We had outlawed the use of hula because hula is, it's not just dance. It's not just because, it's pretty and all that other stuff. The whole purpose of hula is to tell a story, and the specific story is telling their history, telling their religion, telling about their family stories and their country's stories. And we didn't want them to do that, because that would then support their culture, basically saying that their culture was legitimate, and we didn't want that. We also wanted to replace their history with our history, and so we outlawed the hula. We also tried to Americanize them by outlawing many of the dress that was typical in Hawaii. The women were showing far too much skin, because remember, even our new woman, the Gibson girl, still wore dresses that went up to her neck, down to her wrists, and down to her ankles. So women showing their arms and their shoulders and their ankles was just obscene to many Americans and Europeans. And so the hula was outlawed. Well, it's really good for us that they broke that law and taught it to their children anyway, because now, that's like half the reason why people go to Hawaii now, so that they can go see a true, authentic, accurate Polynesian dance show. And so it's really a beautiful thing that we failed in that particular instance. Another one has to do with this guy, Duke Kahanamoku. Now, Duke Kahanamoku was a Hawaiian swimmer that swam for the United States in the Olympics, and he won a bunch of medals, gold medalist, and he was basically the Michael Phelps of his day. And just like Michael Phelps, we were totally obsessed with him, wanted to know everything about him, wanted to know what made him such a phenomenal swimmer. And he said, well, it's because I surf. Well, the thing is, we had actually outlawed surfing. Now, the reason that we had outlawed surfing in Hawaii was twofold. Number one, this was actually part of their faith. This is part of their spirituality, because when you are surfing, it's all about moving along with the ocean, being one with the water. And considering that they believe that they are a people born from the water, it's really communing with nature and communing with their God. And so it's a very spiritual act to surf. It wasn't a sport like it is today. It wasn't a leisure activity like it is today. It was a religious activity in many ways. And so we had outlawed it for that reason. Another reason that we had outlawed it is because, well, early Hawaiians didn't have bathing suits, so they were doing it naked. And we had a very, very big problem with that as these very, moral and uptight and modest Americans. And so we had outlawed it. So when Duke Kahanamoku, says, well, it's because I surf, people are just like, what? What's this? What's surfing? And so, he's showing everybody what surfing really is. And he's showing them the boards that he uses, and that board is actually not an exaggeration of what people were using at this time. The true, real, authentic surfboards were anywhere from 15, 20 feet long, sometimes longer, made from solid wood. They were heavy, and it would take several people to even like carry them into the ocean. Several people would actually ride one particular board at the same time. Not only showing cooperation, but also these giant boards, they can't like rip and shred through the water like we see people do today. It's all about moving with the wave and being one with the wave, and kind of communing with your God in that way. And so being able to actually paddle out one of these boards takes a lot of physical strength. And so that's what made him this great, great swimmer. Well, people became fascinated with it. They wanted to learn more about it. And next thing you know, it makes its way to the west coast of California. And it becomes super popular here because we just happen to have really great surf breaks here, and some of the best in the world. And so it takes hold here and creates an entire California surf culture. The California surf culture is in many ways what put parts of Southern California on the map during the 1960s. You guys are probably all familiar with the Beach Boys and their song Surf City. Gonna Surf City, gonna have some fun. That song is about an actual location. It's about Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach's kind of nickname is Surf City. And so there's like a whole culture that kind of surrounded surfing that was really popular here in Southern California. Now, even if you have never surfed before in your life, there still may be another reason why surfing is important to you as an American. Because a lot of these West Coast surfers, when it was either too cold or blown out to surf that day, they wanted to still be able to practice their skills. So what did they do? Well, they took basically a miniature surfboard and they threw some wheels on it. And they were able to practice the same maneuvers as if they were riding a wave, but instead they're just riding down the sidewalk on a skateboard. And so surfers invented skateboards. And if you have never ridden a skateboard and you're thinking, why should I still care? Well, if you have ever gone snowboarding, you can thank surfers. Because again, more of these surfers from the West Coast, California, who, it was too cold or too blown out, or sometimes in the winter they just wanted something different. Some of them thought, hey, what would be super fun? To take a surfboard up to the mountains, up to the snow, and ride down a hill on a surfboard. I mean, it's kind of like sledding, but standing up. And they tried it, and eventually that developed into modern day snowboarding. So all of these things that are kind of inherent to America's modern day culture are things that were done illegally as practicing surfing. And so I think that that's a really great way to illustrate why it is so important that we understand the failures of white supremacy at this time and how they were very blinded by the idea of a singular culture, and that we know today that this diversity is really allowing us to be a much more interesting and much more complex country, as well as we have, these amazing sports and beautiful dances that almost disappeared. So with that, we're going to finish up for today. And next class, when I see you guys, we're going to be talking about kind of America's biggest events in imperialism, specifically the Spanish-American War. So I'll see you then.